Okay, so tonight we wanted to look at the two records. There's a little bit more than that, but two records specifically related to Jesus Christ's birth. It's just that time of year. We just celebrated Christmas. Biblically, there's nowhere in the Bible that it gives us the date of December 25th. Um, it's you basically figure out that when Rome kind of merged with Christianity. They had certain celebrations, and the birth or the rebirth of the sun god was December 25th because in December 21st or 22nd is the shortest day of the year, and by the 25th, the days are noticeably getting longer. So they would celebrate the rebirth of the sun god. They just baptized it, made it Christian, and called it the birth of the Son of God. But there's no real evidence. In fact, the Bible I've read a number of scholars that believe Jesus Christ was born in September. Some even get it down to a specific day, a specific period of 81 minutes, but we can talk about that maybe another time. But I wanted to look at the records in Matthew 2 and in Luke 2. And let's start in Matthew 2 tonight because I want to read what's written. You know, in a Bible study, we try to talk about how do we understand the Bible and what to do and also what not to do when we're trying to understand the Bible. The birth of Jesus Christ has a lot of things that are not biblical. They have a Christian veneer, and they were kind of baptized and said, okay, well, so many of the things that we do for Christmas, I mean, came from really pagan traditions. Bringing a green tree into your house, nothing to do with the birth of Jesus Christ. And they tell some crazy stories to try to justify it, but nothing to do with it. So there's also songs we sing at times. We three kings of Orient are. We're going to see when we read the record, they're never called kings, and we don't know if there were three of them. There were three gifts, but there were likely a lot more than three of these men that came from the East. Where did they come from? Why would they even come? How would they know that the Jewish Messiah was born? We'll look at that tonight. We read about, it's the song we sing with the tail as big as a kite, talking about the star. We're going to see the Bible says nobody noticed that except the wise men. Herod had to ask them, when did the star first appear? He didn't see it. So if it had a tail as big as a kite, he would have noticed it. Everybody would notice it. There's no indication that anybody with the wise men noticed it. So when we read tonight, we may have to take some of the things that we've had in our head, put them aside, their tradition. And whenever there's a conflict between truth and tradition, we really want to stick with what the Bible actually says rather than what maybe somebody says about the Bible. That's the piece that we get in trouble when so-and-so said this, and this, the right reverend and the great teacher said, and if I can't read it for myself, if I can't show you in the Bible that it says that, you're not obligated to believe it. Neither am I, because faith comes by hearing the word of God. It says in Romans 10:17. So let's go to Matthew 2, and we're going to see some interesting things. It's interesting to see what is in this chapter and also what's missing from this chapter. And as we begin to read the words and pay attention to the particular words God uses, we'll see the story develop. And in Matthew 2, verse 1, it says, now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east of Jerusalem, saying, where is he that is born King of the Jews, or King of the Judeans? For we have seen his star in the east and are come to worship him. We have seen his star. It doesn't say anybody else saw his star. It just says that they had seen his star. I'm going to show you wise men from the east. So the east, you think, okay, where would these guys come from? In the Bible, let me share this. In the Bible, when we talk about north, south, east, and west, it is, unless it's otherwise noted, it's in reference to Jerusalem, unless it's noted somewhere else. So if here we come to the city of Jerusalem and I go straight east, I go into what we call current day Iraq, which back then would be Persia, and I see the city of Babylon. And literally there was a road or a way they could travel up north into Syria and then drop down into Israel. Was typically, they didn't go straight across because of the desert, but they would typically come. So why it says wise men from the east, we'll see when we look at this that these guys, we there's some biblical evidence on who these guys were. We'll look at the Bible to see how could wise men from Babylon learn about the coming of Christ, to the point where you got to think about this. These guys were, oh, sorry, Lorianne, go ahead.
Well, it's okay. I'm just wondering how long of a trip.
Right.
It looks like a long trip.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I mean, it would have taken a month at least to go, even if they traveled on camels or horses. And typically, if you were going to go with a caravan and you were going to bring gold, frankincense, and myrrh, which were all very valuable gifts, you armied up. You came with a lot of people because there were robbers and, highwaymen that would rob you. So if you were going to travel, so the idea that there would only be three guys coming, very unlikely. Biblically speaking, that's not how they travel. They would travel with a larger group, and they had three gifts, but it never says there were three, and it never says they were kings. It says wise men. And so we'll see who these guys could be as we read. We're going to have to look at Daniel to understand how these guys got that information. But there's the first question asked in the New Testament in verse 2. It says, "Where is he that's born King of the Jews or the Judeans? For we have seen his star in the east and are come to worship him." So nobody else, it doesn't say anybody else saw it, but they saw it. They were biblical astronomers. That's different than astrologers. Astrology is forbidden by the Bible. Astronomy is simply the study of the science of the movement of the stars. And these guys did that. And what they saw told them that the king of the Judeans had been born. But how did they get that information? We'll see that from Daniel. Verse 3, when Herod the king had heard these things, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Yeah, current kings hate to hear about new kings. It's something that really bothers them. It's like, nah, I don't want to hear about a new king. So he was playing it coy with them and just not telling them, but he was bothered, all Jerusalem with him. Verse 4, and when he had gathered all the chief priests and the scribes of the people together, he demanded of them where Christ should be born. He knew what they were looking for. He knew that they were coming to find the Christ. He knew what the Bible said, that the Messiah was coming. So he said to the wise men, he said to the chief priests and the scribes, where's Christ supposed to be born? And in Micah 5:2, they quote it and they said unto him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written in the prophet. This is Micah 5:2. And thou, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not least among the princes of Judah, for out of thee shall come a governor that shall rule my people Israel. Then when Herod, when he had privily called the wise men, inquired of them diligently what time the star appeared. If this thing had a tail as big as a kite, you don't think he would have known when it appeared? But it didn't. He didn't know what he was looking for. They understood what they were looking for. They studied the heavens. They saw certain movements that made them think about this. If you were in Babylon, you're sipping your tea one morning and in the east, all of a sudden you see this movement start to happen in the sky, and it convinces you over a period of months, maybe even a year, you see enough celestial evidence that screams at you, hey, Christ has been born. And so they believe it to the point of faith. They get on their camels, they get their stuff together, and they take a somewhat perilous journey from Babylon to Jerusalem to find the Christ. That's a step in faith. These guys definitely acted in faith. So Herod said, what time did you first see this star appear? This is going to become important as to dating what time these guys are here. Because I got to tell you, this isn't the night of Jesus Christ's birth. I know we have to go out and buy the nativity scene, and there are the wise guys, and they're at the same party as the shepherds, and they're all mixing it up. Not biblically, they're not. This is going to be anywhere from 12, 18 months after the birth of Christ, probably 18 months after the birth of Christ. And how will we know that? As we read the specific words that God chose to use in Matthew and see that they're different words than God chose to use in Luke. So Herod inquired diligently When did you guys first see this star appear? Verse 8. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search diligently for the newborn baby. Is that what your Bible says? No.
Young child.
Young child. Right. Jesus Christ would have been a toddler at this point, a young child, maybe 18 months old. And when ye have found him, bring me word again that I may come and worship him also. Well, Herod's a liar. Herod wants to kill him, but he's telling these guys, once you find him, come back and tell me, and I'll come and worship him too. Verse 9. And when they had heard the king, they departed, and lo, the star which they saw, again, doesn't say anybody else saw it, in the east or in the rising. It means in the morning when the last light, when the first light, before the first light of day really broke through, you would take a reading in the sky and they would see this star in the rising, as let's see what in the east means. It was an astronomical term. And they saw it and in the east or in the rising, and went before them till it came and stood over where the young child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding great joy. And when they were come into the manger, is that what verse 11 says?
Went to his house.
Right. Joseph was a good dad. He didn't, he's not hanging out in the manger going, geez, I'd love to move you into a house, Mary, but we got to wait for the wise men to show up. No, he was in a manger because there was no room for them. But Joseph was a skilled tradesman. His wife has a baby. He's going to get them into a house as soon as it's available. So when they were coming to the house, they saw the young child, not newborn babe. It's a different word in the Greek, with Mary, his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented unto him gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. This is where we get the idea that there were three of them, because there were three gifts. But the Bible never gives us a number. Highly unlikely three guys alone would travel. They'd be too easy to pick off. They would have went with a caravan, and in the east, the caravan was large, and they would have showed up. Why would you think they would go to Jerusalem? For me, if I was looking for the president of the United States, I'd probably go to Washington, D.C., right? Wouldn't you go where the capital was, where the president was, if that's who you were looking for? And they'd say, no, he's in Mar-a-Lago down in Florida. Oh, okay, we'll go down there. They showed up in the capital of Israel, Jerusalem, asking about the newborn king. Herod, who was appointed a king by the Romans, knew what they were asking, sent them to Bethlehem to find the child. I figured, hey, I'll just use them as useful idiots. They'll tell me where he is. I'll go kill him. But they show up. They fall down. They worship him. They present gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And verse 12, and being warned of God in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed into their own country another way. So God's working. God's not going to leave his son hanging out there or leave it to chance. He tells these guys, don't go back to Herod. Go to your own country, but don't go through Jerusalem. Travel a different way back. And when they were departed, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, arise and take the young child, not the newborn babe, and his mother, and flee into Egypt, and be there until I bring thee word, for Herod will seek the young child to destroy him. So this gold, frankincense, and myrrh that these men gave him would have financed this trip, would have put them in a very good place. God provided for them. David, God wakes Joseph up and says, go. It's not the night of Jesus' birth. He's a young child at this point. Mary wouldn't have just given birth. So all of this happens probably 18 months. So if we were going to set up the nativity scene, I'd probably put we'll see in Luke that the shepherds were there that night, but the wise men would probably be 3 or 4 blocks away on their way to get there, because they weren't there that night. It took them time to come because they had to be fully convinced that Christ was born. Then let's look at the next one, verse 15. And was there. So Joseph, Mary, and Jesus were in Egypt until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken to the Lord by the prophet, saying, out of Egypt have I called my son. Now that's fulfilled. There's a dual prophecy there. God called Israel out of Egypt, but God also called Jesus out of Egypt in this situation. But both prophecies had been fulfilled. Verse 16, then Herod, when he saw that he was mocked of the wise men, was exceeding wroth, and sent forth and slew all the children that were in Bethlehem and in all the coasts thereof from 2 years old and under. Why? according to the time which you had diligently inquired of the wise men. When did you first see the star? Oh, it was 18 months ago. It was 20 months. Okay. I'll kill all the kids 2 years old and under to make sure I get Christ. So that's what Herod did. So the devil here tries to kill all the children to stop Christ from not being born. He's already been born, but to stop him from surviving. But God's always one step ahead and Joseph gets Mary and Jesus out of Bethlehem and takes them to Egypt. Verse 17, then was fulfilled that which was spoken of Jeremy the prophet, saying, in Ramah there was there a voice heard lamentation and weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and would not be comforted because they are not. So basically they stay there till an angel tells Joseph it's okay to bring the child back. So in this record, we saw no wise men. Jesus Christ wasn't a newborn babe. It wasn't the night of his birth. They weren't in a manger. They were in a house. If we will read the records and pay attention to what it actually says and put aside all the traditions that we've heard, we can make sense of these records. But if we read them and we read into them stuff that I think should be there, but it's not, I'll never understand it. Look at Luke chapter 2. We'll look at the night of Jesus Christ's birth. Luke chapter 2. Actually, you know what? Before we go to Luke 2, I have to answer the question, how did the wise men from the East come to know about Jesus Christ? For that, go to the book of Daniel. So in the Old Testament, Daniel is basically Lamentations. So Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, and then Daniel. Yeah. So in Daniel, there's a number of places here that talk about this. So the book of Daniel is about the carrying away of the children of Israel into Babylon. And when we looked on that map and we went, if we look dead east of Jerusalem, we run right into Babylon. So wise men from the east, from that city of Babylon, but we'll see that they at the time that they came, or time of Daniel, it starts out as the Babylonian Empire. It ends up as the Persian Empire, the Medes and the Persians. We'll see that. So Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, four of the children of Israel that were carried away. The Babylonians were famous for taking the king's children, the princes, the children that were educated, would bring them to Babylon and instruct them in the Babylonian ways, then send them back to their countries to rule their countries for Babylon. So they bring they bring more than four, but of these children, four of them are part of this book in Daniel. Daniel being the chief, and then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So we put him in a situation where the king has a dream. Daniel is actually listed as one of the wise men here. If you look at chapter 1, let's see, down to, I'm looking to see where we want to look at this. Yeah. So in verse 19 of chapter 1, or verse 18, now at the end of the days, verse 18, that the king had said he should bring them in, the princes, then the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. He's the king of Babylon. And the king communed with them, and among them he found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Those are commonly called Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. One of them is their Babylonian name. The other is their Jewish name. This is their Jewish name, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king, and in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all his realm. And Daniel continued even unto the first year of Cyrus. So these 4 Jewish young men begin to advise the king, and he finds their advice is better than the magicians, the magi. This was a religious cult in Persia called the Zoroastrians. And they had very similar beliefs to the Jews. They believed in one God. They believed in the coming of Messiah. And you go, how would they have come to understand this? Well, as we go on and we look forward, there was a situation in here where the king had a dream and he was uncomfortable about the dream and he couldn't remember the dream. So he asked the wise men, tell me the dream and the interpretation. And they said, nobody asked to do that. Give me the dream. We'll tell you the interpretation. He goes, no, you're going to lie to me. I want you to give me both. And nobody could do it. So at the end of this, he says, that's it. I'm sick of all you wise guys. I'm going to kill you all. And they come in to kill Daniel and his three brethren. And he says, give me a little time to inquire of the Lord, and I'll get an answer for the king. So they gave him a little bit of time. And then it says, so in Daniel chapter 2, in verse 26, the king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, that's his Babylonian name, art thou able to make known unto me the dream which I have seen and the interpretation thereof? Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, the secret which the king had demanded cannot the wise men, the astrologers and the magicians, the soothsayers show unto the king. But there is a God in heaven that revealeth secrets and make known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. Thy dream and thy vision of thy head upon the bed are these. As for thee, O king, thy thoughts came into thy mind upon thy bed, what should come to pass hereafter. And he that revealeth secrets maketh it known unto thee what shall come to pass. Verse 30, but as for me, this secret is not revealed to me for any wisdom that I have more than any living, but for their sakes that shall make known the interpretation to the king, that thou mayest know the thoughts of thy heart. And so he tells him the dream, because this is the dream you had, and this is the interpretation of it, which proved to the king that Daniel knew what he was talking about. Because you can make anything up you want. You know, this idea of dream interpretation that people do, it's nonsense. People just make shit up. Well, God tells you the dream, tells Daniel, this is the dream the king had, and this is what it means. The fact that he can tell him what the dream was, and the king goes, you're right, that's what I dreamt. That gives him that faith goes up. Wow, he really does know. So he tells him the interpretation. When it comes down to the end of this, if you look at verse 40 of chapter 2. Then the king Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and worshipped Daniel and commanded that they should offer oblations and sweet odors unto him. And the king answered unto Daniel and said, of a truth it is that your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings and a revealer of secrets, seeing that thou couldst reveal this secret. Then the king made Daniel a great man and gave him many great gifts and made him ruler of the whole province of Babylon and chief of the governors and over all the wise men of Babylon. Wise men from the east. Daniel was put in charge of all the wise men of Babylon. This is where he would have taught them about the coming of Christ. This is where he would have taught them what to look for. And then these men carried this knowledge for hundreds and hundreds of years until finally what they saw in the stars and God's word, the basic prophecies of God's word are written in the stars. You know, it's funny. Have you ever hear the riddle of the Sphinx? The riddle of the Sphinx is, you know, we try to say, well, where if the zodiac is a circle, where does a circle start? You know, you have to pick a spot. Well, where does the circle start of the zodiac? The riddle of the Sphinx is the face of a woman, the body of a lion. It starts in Virgo, the virgin birth, and it ends with the lion, Leo, the lion of the tribe of Judah. The basic prophecies of the scriptures are written in the names of the stars. And so these guys saw something that happened in Leo, where the king planet and the king star did some amazing things. And there were some conjunctions that came together that so astonished them. They literally saw the king planet draw a halo or a crown around the king star. It literally went by it, stopped, did retrograde motion, came back again. And that was enough to convince these men, hey, Christ has been born. We got to go. We got to go see. So Daniel was made the chief of the governor of all the wise men of Babylon. And then he requested that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego also be given important positions. Look at chapter 5, the end of chapter 5. of Daniel. We're still in Daniel. We're going to go to Luke in a minute, but we have to see from the Bible. Even the Bible even tells us where these wise men, these Zoroastrians, there was a split among their group, and these magi split. One group went into magicians, where we get the word magicians, which was, practicing black arts and that kind of stuff. The other one became the Zoroastrians, wise men who were astronomers, biblical astronomers. So here it says at the end of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, or his son's reign, I think it was. It says verse 30. His son Belshazzar. So in that night was Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, slain, and Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62 years old, about 62 years old. Chapter 6, verse 1. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom. Over these 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was first, that the princes might give account unto them, and that the king should have no damage. So even after there was a coup where the Babylonians were thrown out and the Persians and the Medes took over, when Darius came to power, Daniel was still very respected and was still put over in a very high ruling position. These are the times where Daniel would have had access to teach the wise men of Babylon about the coming of Christ. So when we read wise men from the east and we look at the map and we see straight east of Jerusalem is Babylon, and we find out that there was a sect, a religious sect in Persia, the Zoroastrians, that were referred as magi or wise men, it makes sense. Then we look to see Daniel. This is when they would have learned that. So, all right, so we've answered that question. Let's go to Luke chapter 2. Luke chapter 2. This is the night of Jesus Christ's birth. Actually, it starts out a little bit before that as they're traveling to Bethlehem. In chapter 2, in verse 1, it says, and it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus, this was the Roman emperor, that all the world should be taxed. Tax is probably a bad translation. Enrolled. It was basically a census that they would go, they would pledge their allegiance to the Roman emperor, and but they had to go back to the town where their family was from so they could take the census. So all the world is all the Roman world, which was pretty much all the world of the Middle East at that time, for sure, and actually beyond that. Verse 2, and this taxing or this census was first made when Cyrenius, or Quirinius is another translation, was governor or ruler of Syria. And all went to be taxed, everyone to his own city, to where he came from. If this happened in the United States, I'd have to go to Brooklyn, because that's where my family was from. They'd have to go back there to do. They said, hey, you got to go back where you're from. Okay, I'll go back to Brooklyn. I'll enroll there. Verse 3, all went to be taxed, everyone to his own city. Joseph also went up from Galilee out of the city of Nazareth into Judea unto the city of David, which was called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and the lineage of David. So both Joseph and Mary were from the lineage of David. Joseph is really Jesus' stepfather, so he doesn't get any real rights, or I guess he gets inherited rights from his stepfather, but he doesn't get, he gets it through Mary. And when we look at the lineage of Jesus Christ in Matthew 1, it talks about Joseph, and then it says who was the husband of Mary. We should look at that. That's in Matthew. I don't want to go back there right now. The word husband simply means strong man. It could be husband, it could be father. When you count the number of descendants, if it's Joseph, there was 14, 14, 14. And then if Joseph was the husband, there was only 13. But if Joseph was also Mary's father's name, then Mary would be the 14th, and it would be 14. So they tell you that in the verse, how many descendants there were in each of these lines, and how to break it out. So Joseph also had to be Mary's father's name. Here we're talking about her husband. But in Matthew 1, we're talking about Joseph, her father, because that's where she would get the rights to the throne of David to come through that. So verse 6, and so it was while they were there, they were at Bethlehem, the day should be accomplished that she should be delivered. And she brought forth her firstborn son and wrapped him in swaddling clothes and laid him in a manger because there was no room for them in the inn. Swaddling clothes aren't just a loose blanket. So usually when you see a manger scene, it looks like somebody just kind of bunched up a blanket around them. Swaddling clothes were strips of cloth that you would think looked like a mummy, where they would literally wrap the child straight. And they would also cleanse it with salted water. They would cleanse the child with salted water, and they would wrap him in swaddling clothes. And you wouldn't stay in swaddling clothes very long, maybe half an hour, maybe 40 minutes. It wasn't a long time. The swaddling clothes was what they would do, and the salt water they would wash you with, they would do that for kings. And it was something that they were saying. The parents were saying, his words will be salted. What he says, he'll mean. What he means, he'll say. And he's going to have salt. You know, you've heard the phrase, he's not worth his salt. I mean, you can't trust him. Well, they would salt the water when they washed these princes because they were going to be king someday. And the swaddling clothes meant that they were going to raise him upright, that he would be a righteous man. So it was a very short period of time the parents would do this. So they did this for Jesus, and it's going to be a sign to the shepherds because not every kid was wrapped in swaddling clothes. There was no need. So verse 7 again, they brought forth a firstborn. When I tell you that my sister Sharon was the firstborn of my mother, what does that tell you? She had other kids. Firstborn, right? What does firstborn mean? Does it say only? Now, when we talk about God's son, Jesus Christ is the only begotten son of the Father. But when we talk about children that Mary had, Jesus was the firstborn. Look at look at Matthew 13. Keep your finger here. We're coming right back. Matthew 13. Again, these are things we have to unlearn because we've been taught that Jesus, some people teach that Joseph was like in his 40s or 50s or 60s and Mary was this young kid. Not likely. Joseph was probably a little bit older than Mary, but not by a whole lot. That just culturally would not have been common. Here, after Mary has Jesus, she has other children with Joseph that would be Jesus's half brothers. And here it is. If you look at Matthew 13 and verse 55, it says, so the Jews are kind of trying to deride Jesus Christ. And they say, is not this the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary? And his brethren, James and Joseph, Simon and Judas? That's 4 brothers. And James is the one that wrote the book of James. Judas is the one who wrote the book of Jude. These were people that were very involved in the ministry early on. But there are 4 brothers. How many sisters? Let's look. And his sisters, are not they all with us? How many sisters would have to be for me to say all? More than 2. Otherwise, I'd say both. Right? So at least 3 sisters, 4 brothers, and 3 half brothers, right? They had the same mother, Mary, but they had different fathers. Jesus was born of God. These were Joseph's kids. So we read here that, and so that's why when God uses the word firstborn, it should get us to get our attention. Go back to Luke. We want to read words particularly, We want to see these words and read them particularly. God bless you, Robert. Thanks for joining. So we're in Luke chapter 2, and we're looking at verse 7. And she, Mary, brought forth her firstborn son and wrapped him in swaddling clothes and laid him in a manger because there was no room for them in the inn. And they were in the same country, shepherds abiding in the field, keeping watch over their flock by night. Do you guys ever watch like CNN or Fox News and they show you clips of the Middle East right now? It's cold. The shepherds don't stay out in the field past October because it's too cold. I'm going to Pakistan, which is in that region of Middle East, and I'm told that it's 40 degrees colder even. These guys didn't stay out in the field past October because it's too cold. So Jesus Christ definitely wasn't born in December. Well, look at that. We have a place we can look at to get an idea when he actually was born. So there were shepherds abiding in the field, keeping watch over their flock by night. And lo, the angel of the Lord came upon them, and the glory of the Lord shone round about them. and they were sore afraid. I bet they were. This was probably pretty. I mean, these guys had never seen special effects or TV or anything. So this angel shows up with the glory of the Lord. It's got to blow their socks off, right? Verse 10, and the angel said unto them, fear not. That's what angels always say. And they probably need to because they're probably terrified. Fear not, for behold, I bring you good tidings of great joy, which shall be to all people. For unto you is born this day. So this is his birthday. This is the day he was born. The shepherds are hearing this. For unto you is born this day in the city of David, which is Bethlehem, a Savior, which is Christ the Lord. And this shall be a sign unto you. You shall find the babe, the newborn babe, wrapped in swaddling clothes, lying in a manger. I guarantee you, if you went throughout all of Bethlehem, there wasn't another child born that night that was in swaddling clothes or laying in a manger. And suddenly there was an angel, and suddenly with the angel, a multitude of heavenly hosts praising God and saying, not singing, but saying, glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill towards men. It doesn't say they sang. Verse 15. And it came to pass as the angel had gone away from them into heaven, the shepherds said one to another, let us now go even unto Bethlehem and see this thing which is come to pass, which the Lord hath made known unto us. And they came with haste and found Mary and Joseph and the babe, the newborn babe, lying in a manger. And when they had seen it, they made known abroad the saying which was told them concerning this child. They said, hey, Christ has been born. He started telling people in Israel, Christ has been born. Pretty cool. Verse 17, so when they had seen it, they made known abroad the saying which was told them concerning the child. And all that heard it wondered at those things which were told them by the shepherds. But Mary kept all these things and pondered them in her heart. And the shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all things that they had heard and seen as it was told unto them. You know what blows me away? God didn't send these angels to the high priest or to the Sanhedrin, to the scribes or the Pharisees. He didn't show up and say, hey guys, I got great news for you. Christ is born. They didn't, apparently they weren't looking for him. Not like these shepherds were. These shepherds had the hope of Christ's first coming in their heart. They were expecting the Messiah to come. So when this angel announced it, it's like, holy cow, let's go right now and see it. Right? And they went and they saw it. God did that and blessed them. These two records are two separate events. We can't overlay them, or we mix up the word babe with young child. We mix up house with manger. You know, we mix the party with the wise men are hanging out with the shepherds. No mention of the wise men in Luke 2, no mention of the shepherds in Matthew 2, because they're different events. They happened at different times. In fact, from Matthew 2, Jesus Christ being a young child, probably 18 months old from, when the star appeared, and what age he killed all the young children from 2 years old and under to make sure I got him. He didn't get him, but he tried. Now, as far as the date of Christ's birth, we have some records that we can look at. Look at Revelation chapter 12. There are some studies that have done this work. I don't know that I can break it down to the level that they do, but I'll give you what I know, or at least what I've read and believed. Again, there's no specific place in the Bible that gives us the date that says Jesus Christ was born on December 25th, right? We don't have that. We know that that was the date when the rebirth of the sun god was celebrated by the pagans. So when the pagans became Christianized or wanted to appear to be Christians, they adopted these holidays. A lot of the statues that they see in Italy, they can't tell if they were actually pagan gods or Christian saints because they just got renamed. Oh yeah, that used to be Mercury, now it's Paul. We're not supposed to have statues of anything like that. Remember last week I was telling you about how God conceals a thing? In Proverbs 25, I'm just going to read this to you. It's verse 2. It says, it's the glory of God to conceal a thing, but the honor of kings to search out a matter. I think that's such a cool verse. that God doesn't always tell us something plainly. Sometimes we have to dig for it. Here in Revelation 12, we have such a thing. It says in verse 1, there was a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. If you were looking at a zodiac sign, what would be the one represented as a woman? It's Virgo, the Virgin. Yeah, that's so it says that in heaven, this woman, the moon's under her feet, and she had a crown of 12 stars. And she, being with child, travailed in birth and pain to be delivered. And there appeared another wonder in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his head. And his tail drew a third part of the stars of heaven and did cast them to the earth. We read about Lucifer being thrown down to the earth, and his angels, or they're now today, we now refer to his angels as devil spirits, but they were angels at one time. They were cast down with him. His tail drew a third of the stars of heaven. Sometimes stars are used as an analogy for angels. Revelation 1 has that. In fact, it tells us the stars that you saw were the angels of the churches. Here it says his tail, the dragon's tail, drew a third part of the stars of heaven, did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. Didn't we just read that when Herod sent his army to kill all the children, hoping to kill Christ as soon as he was born? As soon as he knew about it, he sent his army there to kill them. And God delivered them. And that's what we read next. And she brought forth a man-child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up to the throne, to God and to his throne. Who's that describing? It's Christ. It has to be. There's no other person that would fit that bill. And the woman now, so sometimes the woman's talking about Mary, sometimes the woman's talking about Israel. It could be both here. The woman being Israel, the bride here. And then it says in verse 6, and the woman fled into the wilderness where she had a place prepared of God that she should feed her there 1,260 days. So we have this event that took place, and the way the stars were aligned that night, it tells us in Revelation 12:1 that the sun and the moon were in Virgo, which would have been in September, and sunset and moonset. Basically, when we read this, it says this particular configuration happened September 11, 3 BC. Sunset was at 6:18 p.m. and moonset was at 7:39, which would have been an 81-minute period of time that Jesus Christ was born. That's something that you need to be able to research how the stars were set in that time and what they look like from Jerusalem, not what they look like from New Hampshire or Malawi or Pakistan, but what the stars look like in Jerusalem when Virgo, the sun would be in Virgo, the moon under its feet, that sunset, that moonset, that time frame. The amazing thing about it being September 11th was that was Rosh Hashanah. That's Jewish New Year. It was considered when basically the trumpets would blow all day long to glorify God, that God would have had his son take his first breath on that day. So since then, some pretty terrible things have happened on September 11th, but that's the devil trying to obscure the meaning of that day. But when we read the Bible with what's specifically written and don't read into it and put aside traditions aren't bad in and of themselves, except when they contradict the Bible. So, because if I tell you that there were 3 kings that visited from the east and you read it and you can't find that, it makes the Bible look bad. It's nothing to do with the Bible being wrong. It's me. I impose that onto the Bible. But when I say when I say wise men from the east, and we can see a map that the east is Babylon is and then we read about Daniel instructing the wise men of the east. Now it all comes together. We have that puzzle piece that just fits. And when it fits like that, it glorifies God. It is the glory of God to conceal a thing and the honor of kings to search it out. So we do. We study. In fact, let's close it. Let's look at 2 Timothy 2. We'll close here tonight, and then we'll have questions if you have any. 2 Timothy 2 and in verse 15. It says, study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. When we read the Bible, we want to rightly divide it. We want to present it and understand it in the light of how God has put it. We want to read it in the context. We want the words to be according to their biblical usage, not their current usage. We want to read what's written. We want to read young child when it says young child and babe when it's a newborn babe. We read manger in one and house in the other. That's part of studying to show ourselves approved unto God. That's how we uncover. God conceals a thing. Don't you think God must get a kick out of it when his kids search out the truth like that? When you're kind of studying it and you find something, you go, wow, look at this. This is amazing. And, you're rejoicing and God's chuckling. He's like, that's great. I'm so glad you spent the time to read this and to understand it. So what I'm not saying is, let's change the day to Christmas, because quite honestly, if it was that important, God would have gave us a date in the Bible plainly. Secondly, anytime people want to talk about the birth of Christ, count me in. You want to sing about Christ? I'll get the songbooks. Let's go downtown and we'll walk around carol and we'll sing about Christ and we'll talk about Christ. So anytime people want to have a conversation about Jesus Christ, I'm not going to tell them not to do that. I'm not going to say, oh, yeah, we need to move our Christmas celebration to September 11th. I'll talk about it. Now, September 11th, I may mention that to people as well. The Bible indicates from how the stars were set in Revelation that that's when Jesus Christ was born. And that would make sense because the shepherds would still be in the field on September 11th. They wouldn't be out in the field past October because it's just too cold. You didn't keep your sheep out in the field when it was that cold. People think that the Middle East is always hot. It's not. In the desert, it gets cold at night. It gets very cold. So questions, comments? I kind of hope that out of this, the principles that we looked at tonight were to read the Bible as it's written, that we take each word. We don't try to change a word, delete a word, add a word. We don't try to make the Bible say anything. We go to the Bible and let it speak to us. Is that first time you've heard some of that?
Yep.
It's definitely take some time and read it. Work it for yourself. Maybe if you need to listen to this again, I'll post it later tonight. It'll be up on the YouTube channel. But, we're not doing this to basically make fun of anybody. We're not doing it to make people feel bad. I'm not even trying to change the date that people celebrate Christmas. I simply want us to be able to read the Bible for what it says and believe what it says. And then when there are things that somebody says, well, they were kings. Well, it doesn't say that in the Bible. Yeah, but the church fathers told us they were kings. If it doesn't say it in the Bible, I don't care who said they were kings. The Bible never says that. Faith comes by hearing the word of God, the Bible. That's what we have to have faith in. If somebody says, so-and-so said there were only 3 of them. Okay, my Bible doesn't say that. If you can show it to me in the Bible, I will change my mind. You can convince me if you can show me in the Bible. But if you want to say, well, Augustine said that, or Tertullus, or some of these other church fathers, that doesn't hold any weight for me. That's no different than I'm saying something or you're saying something. Where the authority is faith comes by hearing the word of God. If it's not in the Bible, that's where our faith comes from. First and foremost, what does the Bible say? And if something doesn't contradict the Bible, okay, well, that's fine. We can, there are traditions that don't contradict the Bible that I would say, fine, if you want to have that. You don't have to have that, but you can. One of the most common ones is, people get into fights on what day they should worship. And, they say, well, Sunday. And I say, why? And they say, well, that's a Sabbath day. I go, the Bible never calls Sunday the Sabbath day. What do you mean? always called Saturday the Sabbath. Yeah, but that got changed. Not in the Bible, it didn't. But Romans 14 tells us we can worship on any day we want. So if you want to worship on a Sunday, worship on a Sunday. You want to worship on a Saturday, worship on a Saturday. You want to worship on Tuesday morning or Thursday afternoon, you can worship every day or any day. But I can't call Sunday the Sabbath day. Their fallback position is, well, that's the Lord's Day. Again, the Bible never calls Sunday the Lord's Day. It doesn't, because the Lord's Day is the day of God's righteous wrath, which is coming. That's the Lord's Day. And Sunday's never, the Lord's Day is never a day of the week. So we don't take tradition and impose it on the Bible, or we get misunderstanding after misunderstanding. We read the Bible, we read what's written, we believe what we can read plainly. We do a little studying if we need to understand it more. And we have great resources where we can study to understand some of this stuff. So, Lorianne.
So just because we're talking about this, I was going to bring this up earlier if I had gotten on earlier. So I'm reading Matthew right now.
Okay.
And in chapter 9, verse 38 says, "Pray ye therefore the Lord of the harvest, that he will send forth laborers into his harvest." And before that, I'm not reading anything about fields needing to be harvested.
Right. There's a couple of places that Jesus uses that phrase.
So in my head, I'm saying, oh, he's talking about the multitudes following him and his disciples being fishers of men.
You got it. That's exactly right.
Right?
It's exactly right.
I looked it up on the internet to try to validate what I was thinking, and they don't say that at all. Yeah,
Luke 9 and 10, when he sends out, there's places where you can look up that phrase. Like, for instance, let's take a quick look. I'll share my screen for a second. Let me go back. I'm going to show you the map, but then we'll change it. Can you see the Bible Gateway there?
Yeah.
Okay, so you said Lord of the Harvest. Lord of the Harvest. So if we use that phrase, there's your Matthew 9, right?
Yeah.
And then let's go back to the Old Testament. I want to see the New Testament. There it is, Luke 10. So Luke 10 says, let's look at it in context. Luke 10:1. After these things, the Lord appointed other 70 also and sent them 2 by 2 before his face into every city and place whither he himself would come. Therefore he said unto them, the harvest truly is great, but the laborers are few. Pray ye therefore the Lord of the harvest that he would send laborers forth into his harvest. In the context of them going out 2 by 2 to witness.
Okay. Yay.
So that's how you use a phrase. Search where else it's used. And see because a lot of times, if you don't get the understanding of that phrase in one place, you'll see it in another.
Okay.
And God will define it oftentimes like that. I'm going to stop the recording.